lived to that point, probably. So he's just using it to make him feel better.
Well, there's also a point in that passage where looking at the city of Taipei makes him feel disappointed in, I've never been to Taipei, but here's a city where technology may have seemed to take over as much as it possibly could, or more so than in Williamsburg, where lots of the rest of the novel takes place. But yet, it's nowhere near the singularity he hoped for as a child. It reminds me of something my uncle once said to me when I came home for Christmas, which is, Chris, you know about this stuff. When are there going to be robots that can just do stuff for me? And he didn't even have a conception of nanobots that could enter the bloodstream, granting you immortality.
Yeah.
I suppose my next question, before we move on to Cleveland, is, and we didn't discuss this, we just had a drink just now. We haven't seen each other since December.
I didn't get to say how I met you.
Oh.
Did you do that?
I recall the first time I met you, I think, was at a N+1 party. The second time I met you, I think, was at a Sam Lipsyte book party. And then at that point I asked you, why don't you follow me on Twitter? Is that accurate?
I said I only follow people I hang out with regularly. Maybe.
Right. You follow very few people. I follow about 3,000. We have different ways. But I was gratified when you followed me. One thing we talked about in 2010 was a different style present in various of your books. And as I recall it back then, you had your concrete realist style, which was the style of Richard Yates, the Laurie Moore style, which is present at least in Dead, and the non-fictional style, which was present in many pieces you were doing at the time for Thought Catalog. Yeah. One of the greatest of which, just for our audience, is, I don't remember the title, but it's called Coco the Gorilla.
Yeah, it's just called Coco the Talking Gorilla.
Coco the Talking Gorilla.
I'm glad you liked it.
You know I like it.
Well, you told me you liked it.
I've told you that. I told you to read it at an Asian American Writers Conference, I think?
I did.
Yeah, how did that go over?
I felt like they didn't like it.
It maybe was a bit off topic for the conference.
I even watered it down with a lot of slide pictures.
Yeah. Well, I mean, those pictures are pretty entertaining. My question is, does this book represent a new style or some kind of fusion of the previous styles, or?
Probably just a denser Laurie Moore style, and also the essay style.
Yeah.
That's what you thought?
I definitely detected some aspects of the essay style entering into it. I suppose my question would be, I felt the function of quotation marks in Taipei is somewhat unstable, but I imagine that you have a conception of how they work.
Yeah.
One time you told me that you were interested in writing a book about punctuation.
Yeah. About my writing style.
About your writing. What about punctuation in the abstract? There are other writers in the world besides you.
Yeah, because I feel like...
Do you think you could start a punctuation movement?
Well, there's one thing I feel strongly about, which is if there's dialogue, say it's like Paul says the store is good.
Right.
And I just said that, and like
what goes in quotation marks there? The store is good.
Yeah, but the I feel like should be lowercase, and there should be no comma after the sentence.
I disagree.
Why?
Because you need a break, a punctuational break, to indicate the difference between narrational speech and dialogue speech, and you also need to indicate the beginning of a sentence within dialogue. For example, if you were picking that out from some other things Paul had said, presumably there was a sentence that came before it that ended with a period, and the begins a new sentence. In any case, I would like to move on to Cleveland.
Well, that though would be capitalized if it. Yeah, I feel like you just like learned that.
I've been a professional editor since 1998.
That's the problem.
Stuck in my own.
Okay, we can stop playing.
Alright, I'm going to read from, I think, page 105 now, a passage I identified as one of my favorites in an email yesterday to Tal, who was at the time in Minnesota.
I'll introduce you.
Okay.
The characters Aaron and Paul have recently met, and this night they're with two other mutual friends, and they're on mushrooms.
The next night, Aaron and Paul met Christine, 22, a mutual acquaintance from the internet, and Christine's friend Sally, 22, in a public park that was closed for the night. Christine sold Paul 8 36 milligram Ritalin and 10 psilocybin chocolates, wrapped in tinfoil like little hockey pucks. They each ate a chocolate and walked through the park to the end of a beach where they sat in the gently fluorescent light of a half moon that looked like a jellyfish photographed from far below in mid-propulsion, its short tentacles momentarily inside itself. In the distance, Cleveland's 3 tallest buildings, each with a different shape and style of architecture and lighting, were spaced oddly far apart, like siblings in their 30s in a zany sitcom. After spending their lives hating one another in a small town, they moved to different cities and were happy, but then got coincidentally transferred by their employers to the same medium-sized city. They were all named Frank. Paul felt reluctant to say anything weird because Christine and Sally were behaving normally, with earnest expressions, as if pretending they weren't on mushrooms, except sometimes one would mention seeing beautiful colors, increasing Paul's apprehension because earlier he and Aaron had bonded over feeling alienated by people who focused on visuals instead of people while on hallucinogens. Deciding, after around 15 minutes, to drive somewhere in 2 cars, they walked on the beach toward the parking lot. The clear moonlight sometimes fleetingly appeared on Lake Erie to their left as thin layers of snow resting on the surface of the water as if painted on, or briefly riding the shoreward foamy fronts of tiny waves before vanishing. Sally's car on the highway got a flat tire.
Good reading. Thank you.
So the only word in there, in quotation marks, was hating.
There, it's supposed to mean
The siblings hating each other.
so they thought of themselves not as like earnestly 100% hating each other. They like knew they were like.
It was almost more like the concept pitched in the sitcom pitch meeting in LA, or the elevator pitch, as it's said. And I've never been to Hollywood.
Well, they just be like, I hate you, or they just be like, I hate you, but they wouldn't like hit them, or they just be like, I really hate you. But they'd be grinning maybe.
They'd be grinning. That brings up something I'm very curious about in this book, which is the constant use of the term grinning in a book that also contains the word smiling several times. Now, do you differentiate your use of the words grinning and smiling? Definitely.
Smiling is like... I can't do it because it's natural. But grinning is like
Grinning
nervousness involved in it.
Nervousness or effort?
Nervousness and
or? And slash or?
Some kind of like secret information. Irony.
Irony.
You don't differentiate between smiling and grinning?
I don't really like the sound of the word grinning, so I don't use it that much.
Is there another writer who uses grinning more than me, do you think?
Marie Calloway uses it, I think, too much, but I think she took that from you.
No, she uses smirking, which I never use.
Huh. I'm thinking perhaps of the wrong story.
I'm interested in your review, since you
moved on to the next point in our talk before I even thought we were ready, but yeah. So there have been some interesting reviews of Tao's book. In the New York Times, Dwight Garner said he saw Tao's avowed allegiance to Ann Beatty in parts of the book, and he hoped that Tao would continue in that direction, which is generous in a way, but I think also somewhat prescriptive. But it was a generous review. Tao told me earlier that he doesn't want to talk about many of his influences, including Knut Hamsun, Hemingway, Ann Beatty, Schopenhauer, Jean Rhys. Am I pronouncing that correctly? All right. I'm kind of behind on her.
More interested in your thoughts on reviews.
I thought that was, well, we'll move on. Other reviews have come from Benjamin Lytall, who called your book a modernist masterpiece. Well, he's used those two words in separate paragraphs, so it's not
it's in what's it called? The headlines.
Oh, it's in the headline.
But
Right.
he didn't write that, right?
Good work.
Did you write that? You wrote that? What did you think about that?
I just saw them in two separate paragraphs.
No, but he wasn't like...
He didn't say, please.
Oh.
And a good editor will never let the writer determine the headline, but a good writer will maybe leave that editor if he doesn't like the headline. Listen to me.
Thank you.
Emily Witt was very sensitive, to your celebrity status.
You moved on from the Lytall road.
Well, all right. Let's think about Lytall. Another thing I think Ben Lytall was sensitive to was your humor, which I think a lot of people who, to my mind, misunderstand you miss out on a lot. The humor in your books, to me, is since your first book of poetry, is very deadpan, very present, and also very crucial to gaining pleasure. Not to kiss your ass further, but well, one thing I'll just say to all of you is like, sometimes you're meant to laugh when reading Tao's books. Ben points out a passage in the Las Vegas section, which I believe is section 4, in which after marrying in a desk wedding in an office building in Las Vegas, Paul runs through a parking lot to a car in an arc. We haven't flagged the passage, but I think Ben does an insightful job of saying that in a novel where many of the characters are sad or reverting to their default mode of bored depression.
Do you think we could hear from Tao?
Well, I want to hear that.
All right.
That's why I came.
Go ahead.
Please.
Cal? Well, just finish that thing first.
This is where Paul comes close to expressing happiness.
Another thing he did was that he, in the first 2 paragraphs, he was like, we should stop talking about Tao as a generational writer. He comes from this tradition, which I like. And in the second paragraph, he listed the influences that I always list in like every interview. And I felt something similar to when you wrote, you made a point of getting my at least three different prose styles into the piece, which not many people do. Even some people who read this book will call it flat, simple language.
When in fact it's very much involved in figurative language, simile, metaphor, and consciousness.
Yeah. So I'm grateful to
Trying to
you
restrain myself.
and Benjamin myself and Michael Silverblatt. There's like not many people who even like read an interview by me and like, I guess, process it.
Right. Do you want to talk about one of the negative reviews that's come out?
Yeah.
It was in the Los Angeles Times.
I'm really interested in your thoughts on the Lydia Millet.
Well, she's a critic I find very interesting because we have some opinions in common, and this is one in which we part ways. My succinct impression is that she noticed a lot of things insightfully about your book, but entered into it with a resistance that perhaps was very honest, and therefore her review is negative, but still contains, I think, good insights into the book. And she can tell that you are a craftsman or a stylist, or however you want to put it. It's a predicament of a reviewer that a reviewer's first job is to notice what's going on and then to be honest about their reaction. And so I do think that she was honest, even though, you know, she had a reaction somewhat opposite of the reaction I'm currently having towards you. In the future, maybe we'll turn on each other.
I've talked like every night for the last 15 nights, and I'm like have like 100 interviews on the internet, but I rarely get to hear like Christian talk about stuff. So I like.
That's one explanation for. I'm sorry. I think now we should have an interlude where we take questions from the audience and just open it up. So, who wants to raise their hand?
talking about this thing. The news editor for the Publishers Marketplace, Sarah Wyman, tweeted something like, Talon has been running a long con for years. No wonder you'd be upset if you remark and it linked to a negative review where someone was like, just didn't like my book. And has like 190,000 Twitter followers. And I didn't do anything about it. But then like a week later, I guess I was just thinking about, well, I guess I just thought, like, what if I had 3 kids? I'd be so, like, angry at her. Because that's something that I feel like it's not going to cause more discussion and sell more books. I don't think. But it'll turn off, like, many readers automatically. Like, I would just be like, alright, that person might be running some con thing. Since there's like millions of books, I'll just avoid that person. So I was thinking if I had 3 kids or like parents with huge medical bills, I'd be so pissed off. I'd be like, no, I didn't seem pissed off, the reason. Oh. Well, I was just joking. I was like, so I had 12 kids or something. No, I wasn't.
Do you have 12 kids or parents who are sick?
I don't have kids, but my parents are getting old. And like,
I'm saying somewhere do, like you could have in theory.
yeah.
Or if your parents, some of you can have them financially, but you know.
Yeah.
Or he could have figured that out.
Well, Tao has had his familiarity with paucity. Next question.
What's that mean?
I have 2. They're mildly related. The first is there's a pile of books over here of yours. I'm sure you've seen similar ones. And I wonder if you look at them, if you feel like you're looking at an accurate picture of you, or if it seems kind of foreign.
A pile of books.
Like a pile of
No, I just see books.
The other is, just from my perspective, it's the only like signage that I see like behind you just says religion, and it seems like it's like pointing at you, and it's slightly disconcerting. And I wonder if you wanted to comment on that.
Religion and
My framing, that's like all I see.
Religion is interesting to me.
People in this corner see Spanish memoir.
That's, never mind, I'm not going to say. But religion, no.
Right there, in the blue shirt.
Okay, so reading all the reviews in Taipei, did you ever find a review that actually told you something new about your book, or that was also true?
I think you said so. When you emailed me about the Lighthall review, you said it made you feel like writing.
Yeah, I felt really moved. Just that he listened, he had read my interviews and believed me. I felt moved just from that, and then the other stuff also. The ending was kind of complicated. Do you remember that?
Well, he says, this wasn't what I expected from Tao Lin's masterpiece. Then again, I never expected one.
But then again, I wouldn't have, or something.
Or I wouldn't have.
So do you think he was talking about it because the general view of me is that I'm not going to write a masterpiece because I'm a generational writer?
I think he had a period as a columnist for a newspaper where he was looking at every novel that was going out there, and he found you interesting, but didn't have strong feelings. And this book, I think he had ended up having strong feelings that he didn't expect to have.
Just because of like what is out there. And,
Yeah.
yeah.
You.
Hi. I've noticed in reading your work that there seems to be this marked disparity between, like, I really don't want to say flat because that's not the right word, but this almost kind of simple dialogue, simple style, you have like kind of three characters dialogue, and then these rich inner lives that they lead. What do you feel you gain from having that kind of contrast, or is there a particular reason that's there?
Simple dialogue. That's just probably inserts being realistic.
But no, I mean that compared to like what I said is they're like rich inner lives, and it's like Paul's thoughts, and the way he talks about the computer and the universe and all these different ideas. Like you said, it's not a novel of ideas; it's a novel of Paul's ideas. And so I think it's kind of almost that contrast that really is interesting. But I'm just wondering why that's there.
Well,
That's just how most people are.
I think it also represents a conscious literary strategy that you've
That's
identified.
not how most people are. A lot of people talk a lot and loud and all the time, and they don't talk in simple language. Actually, this is something that you don't see that often. I don't see that often. I don't know if you can compare it to like real life situation or books.
Simple language.
I guess Tao and I have differing views on this subject.
Wait, what?
You say that's how people are, and I say that's a conscious literary strategy that Tao is employing.
Well, that's how I am. So, knowing myself, that's what I'm going to use.
But, so you're indicting Tao for being a non-universalist.
No, I'm just observing how people talk.
Can you talk about, like, if it's a book that you say is, like, sort of explicitly autobiographical, and you have a lot of ideas that are attributed to Paul, like, how do you think a reader is supposed to look at them? I think it's true, like, with Marie Calloway, too. And I think that maybe that's why, like, sometimes, like, reviews have, like, especially with Marie Calloway, it seems like people are misreading it by, like, people saying that, like, the idea is the same. How ideally would someone read those ideas, do you think? Like, the ideas of the character.
There's only one way to read them, just the ideas, just to read them. You mean who to attribute them to?
I don't know.
Well, ideally, for me, just it's all fiction, it's all sentence. Ideally, you read it, and then you meet people, and you don't attach any of the information in the book to whoever.
Who's next? In the pink and back.
Do you think that all the feedback that you get like from the internet and stuff and bring to the public makes it easier or harder to do what you have to do as a writer?
I don't know. Probably has a little effect. Little effect. Not much effect.
Do you ever imagine your life at a time before the internet?
Can I remember it?
No. Do you ever imagine if you were the same age you are now, but the internet didn't exist yet? I mean, there would be a lot of other differences too, obviously. Like all phones would have cords and things.
No, I haven't thought hard about that. That'd be interesting.
Yeah. Have you ever considered writing a historical novel?
No, I'm not even know.
science fictional novel involving time travel to the past.
That's more interesting. What's your historical novel you like?
War and Peace.
I haven't read that. Well, how is that historical?
It was written in the late 19th century, and it's about Napoleon's invasion many decades earlier of Moscow.
Okay. Well, some of my books have been about 5 to 10 years earlier.
That's technically called a Zeitroman.
Well, I wrote about 9/11 in 2007.
Right, but there's a distinction between a historical novel that takes place before the author's lifetime and a novel about historical events that took place within the author's lifetime. I grant you.
I think you prefer non-historical novels. Just based on
I
one
have
review.
I've said that in reviews, but I don't know if that's a good bias. But I have lots of flaws, as has been pointed out tonight. Next question. Emily? Oh, okay. Who? I lost it. Dick.
Go ahead.
Emily in the back, and then you next. Is that all right?
So you still do a lot of drugs?
Yeah. I mean, a lot from time to time. But it doesn't matter. This answer's not going to lead to anything good.
Yes.
It sounds like you're about to say something.
Well, I was just going to say you can learn a lot about Tao's or Paul's views on drugs just by reading the book, I think. And particularly the interaction between Paul and Paul's mother, I think shows a lot of thinking.
I'm curious about, as a writer, in the book, Paul, he has long breaks between his book tours, but he's not really writing. And I was wondering, what's your writing process, and when are you most productive? Yeah.
He's writing, I think, a lot throughout all that time in the book.
When he's on his MacBook doing things or doing work, he's writing.
Yeah, sometimes he'll say he's working on stuff. Or he's leaving the library.
Or taking notes on his iPhone that are clearly involved in the creation of the scene at hand, perhaps.
Maybe, yeah. I just don't have scenes of him sitting at the computer. He typed was sleep.
Yes.
I don't mean to sound accusative, but you say that reading reviews and engaging with people's opinions of you online doesn't have much effect. But you also seem really preoccupied with what people say about you online. Why read it then? If it has
Because it's extremely interesting.
Why do you get from it?
Interest levels. If I read another book, I also look at what other people say about it. And I read biographies, which is someone's view of someone's life. And then there's critics that I just am interested in reading.
What biographies have you been reading lately? Or what are your favorites?
My favorites are all the ones by Blake Bailey. And also the Ronald Heyman one on Coco. What about you?
Next question.
Is there a reason why you stopped writing poetry?
No. Or some of it maybe Twitter. Twitter is has advantages to write lines there than in some file.
Yes.
I've read the book more than once, and the only thing that I didn't understand was actually something that Christian read, that like the three building siblings, why were they all named Frank?
Literally named Frank.
I asked him that question on email yesterday too, and I said the only parallel in the sitcom universe I can think of is Newhart, where there was a character who said, "Hi, I'm Larry. This is my brother Daryl, and this is my other brother Daryl."
I maybe failed a little in conveying that by that sentence. It was Paul said, just him thinking they're all named Frank.
I like got that, but I still didn't.
Well, it's funny, right?
People laughed when it was read. Question?
I just wanted to ask about the writing process. When you start writing your book, do you start with an outline, or do you have a basic, vague idea of what you want to write about, and how do you organize those ideas?
At some point, I had get an outline, but it's very early in the process. Probably like 5% into the, or not outline, but the entire thing. I have probably like 5% of the time into working on it. And I just keep editing that for the other 95%.
Thank you. I have a follow-up question to that, which is, do you have a very large manuscript that becomes shorter, or a manuscript around the same size as the finished book that you spend time refining?
At first, very large, like 300,000 words, but that quickly goes down to like near the final word count, and then it stays around the final word count. Wait, for this book.
I have a different question. I'm going to choose myself for a minute. Do you have a printer at home, and how much paper, computer, writing, editing? What are your thoughts on that?
I don't write on paper, but at the library I print it out after every day, and I make hand edits.
Is that fun?
Sort of, yeah.
I like it too.
How did you lose your manuscript? You tweeted last year that you lost your manuscript.
Well, it's just at this place, and I lost it. But I have every draft saved in my Gmail, so. But I think that when I lost, I had a lot of hand edits on it. But it was fun.
I remember reading a piece on Thought Catalog maybe a week or 2 weeks ago, and it was someone who read Taipei and was making commentary on each individual page. I think you posted it.
Yeah.
Do you know what I'm talking about? Okay. And one comment that I thought was interesting was someone described the narration as being Proustian, like Proust, in terms of the reminiscences on memory. And I thought that was interesting, and I was wondering if what you thought about that comparison and what it means to you, I guess.
Benjamin Lytle also said that.
He did.
I've probably only read 100 pages of Proust, but I understand he writes about memory, and this book has a lot of stuff about memory in it, so I guess that makes sense.
A good Proust book is called Swan's Way. Anybody?
Can I have a do-over? Do-over of my question.
Do-over, and then someone over here.
When you taught a class at Sarah Lawrence, what did you assign your students to read?
It was a short story class. It was a contemporary short story class. So there are about 20 short story writers. Started with James Purdy and Grace Paley, and then it went in chronological order. It went to Kmart realist people, and George Saunders, Robert Cooper, Dave Foster Wallace. I made a chart and it's online. Have you seen that chart? I'll email you the link.
It's a good chart.
I'll email you the link.
Very useful.
What are you teaching? Oh.
Wait, follow-up question, sorry. Do you think people should try to write
No. I don't think anyone should anything.
So, kind of follow up on that. I got the sense reading some of the reviews that there's a fear, anxiety that some reviewers have that you're going to influence people, and people will write like you, and that's going to bring down civilization. So, I mean, how would you rebut that? How would you respond to that?
That's just what a certain percentage of people will always be saying.
What do you think it is about the writing that gets that reaction?
Well, my first poetry book, many of the pieces were written really fast. And I don't know, maybe you can probably answer this.
Well, I was saying to someone earlier tonight that part of my initial resistance to Tao's writing when I was seeing earlier pieces come out in lit mags was that I felt that there was something immature about it. And as he's gone on, I've been more fascinated by his work, and that now I find there's a maturity to his immaturity, in that part of his subject matter or his themes is a kind of arrested development, a transition between childhood and adulthood that is dramatized in the books. Another aspect, and a separate aspect really, is his deviation from traditional narrative modes that you find in conventional realist fiction. Any writer who can be called avant-garde is going to be valued in a way either as a thing in itself or by writers who will think of what that innovator is doing as a set of tools that later writers can use, right? So it may be that somebody comes in and reads Tao's books, sees what he's doing, and takes all that and makes something that Tao couldn't have imagined and that, you know, impresses us all and takes over. That'll be interesting.
And one of the things I found most interesting in Taipei that came across aside from the drug use and the character through a love story, the relationship between Paul and Mother. I just wondered if you see that as a dominant
Yeah. I mean, the first part shows the relationship failing, then there's the interim period where you're just waiting for the book tour, and then he meets Aaron, and that is pretty much the rest of the book. Yeah, right now I feel in a diatribe in his reviews that I've gotten like past reviews, but
when Tao and I were talking, I said, and I'll be succinct, one of the things that seemed interesting to me was the contrast between two relationships in the book. The one between Paul and Michelle, which is, you only see it in its sort of decline and a process of alienation. And therefore Michelle is less good a character than Aaron, whom we see in an arc. Very small insight, sorry to take up your time. Yes?
Yeah, hey Tao, I don't know if you can see me, but I interviewed you for Rain Pack.
Yeah, I remember. Yeah, I remember.
I hear this stuff about resistance and the long con, and I hear about some other authors, like probably Blake Butler. You know. I remember, you know, I was taken immediately. I never had any doubt about you, okay? I got in touch with you. I fucking interviewed you. I got a friend, German, she was in New York for a weekend. I showed her, you're a little happier than I am. She bought it on the spot, you know. So, blah, blah, blah. You know, that's like, I don't get it. You know, I don't get where these people are coming from. They're like chewing on your end. Anyway, it's nice to see you again.
Thank you.
I would say that you definitely get it. But you're right, and you see ahead. Ian.
Cal, can you explain your Instagram handle?
Yeah, it's really long. It's like it's because both Tao_Lin and Tao Lin were taken. And I just tried to get them, but I don't know how to get them. And my profile says like, how do I get them? Yeah, stuff like that. People see that and think I'm just like not a serious person. But
next question. Yellow.
Yeah, thank you. Hey, I'd like to ask, what do you think is the biggest similarity you would like to admit between you and Paul?
Me and Paul? I don't think I can answer that at all, just because Paul is different throughout the entire book. I'm different like every day. Yeah, I don't think I could answer that at all.
I asked Paul a similar question. I asked and he said I want to talk about Paul because I think of Paul in terms of sentences that I have a very close relationship to. James?
So my question is, if in some hypothetical situation you were no longer able to be a writer, and that when you couldn't write, and you couldn't just write on your own in private or whatever, what occupation would you do, and how would you fill that time that you had be spent previously to writing?
I think luckily he doesn't have to think about that right now.
I play drums, so I don't think I'll be able to make money off that. I don't know. I mean, I already know. I tweet and stuff.
I hadn't thought that far.
That's the new dream. Do you want to sign books now?
Art. I do art.
Art.
Yeah.
You want to sign books now?
Yeah. Yeah.
All right.
Just see if there's one more question.
One more question. Yeah.
What if there's a possible danger that Twitter might pose for writers who will be following the novels on Twitter and not bothering to read the novels anymore? Are you afraid of that?
No, not at all. Just because it's all words. And if you're gonna be forced to be concise, no one needs to read novels or anything.
But some people like to.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, if they like to, they're gonna do it.
Yeah.
But I don't think there's a danger. No.
Thanks, everybody.
Yeah, thank you.